Go have the baby alone, he'd said coldly, walking out of her life. But 18 months later, the billionaire froze, because she wasn't holding one baby. She had 3. A very, very beautiful story for my beautiful family. If you want more beautiful stories, visit our other channel, Mr. Peter Stories. Let's start with love. Stephen Mattison didn't believe in second chances. Not for failed deals, not for weak employees, and certainly not for his own frozen heart. But Julie Johnson walked into his corner office like spring breaking through ice, carrying nothing but a leather portfolio and a smile that made him forget, just for a moment, why he'd built walls so high. She wasn't supposed to matter. The contract position was temporary, 3 months maximum, analyzing supply problems that had plagued his company for half a year. Stephen had watched 6 consultants fail before her, each one leaving with excuses and hefty invoices. Julie arrived on a Monday morning wearing a simple grey suit that had seen better days, her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun, and when his assistant introduced them, she didn't gush or flatter or try to impress him with credentials. "Mr. Mattison," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip. "I read through the files you sent. Your problem isn't in the supply chain. It's in the communication gaps between your warehouse managers and procurement team. They're ordering based on outdated data because nobody bothered to sync the systems. Give me access to your internal platforms in 3 weeks. I'll have it solved." Stephen had blinked, caught off guard by her directness. Most people trembled in his presence. Julie Johnson looked at him like he was simply another puzzle to solve. She delivered in 2 weeks and 4 days. The solution was elegant, simple, and saved his company millions. Stephen found himself calling her into meetings she wasn't required to attend, asking her opinion on matters outside her contract scope. She answered with the same straightforward honesty, never trying to soften truths he needed to hear. When executives pushed back on her recommendations, Julie didn't argue. She presented data, let the numbers speak, and watched grown men realize a contracted analyst had outsmarted them. "You're wasted on temporary work," Stephen told her one evening as they reviewed quarterly projections. The office had emptied hours ago, just the 2 of them surrounded by paperwork and cold coffee. "I want to offer you a permanent position." "I can't accept it," Julie said, not looking up from her spreadsheet. "The salary would be substantial. It's not about money." "Mr. Mattison, then what is it about?" She finally met his eyes. "My mother is sick, very sick. I'm working 3 contracts simultaneously because her medical bills are drowning me. A permanent position means giving up the other 2 incomes. I can't afford that risk right now." Stephen felt something shift in his chest. Most people who worked for him guarded their personal struggles, maintained professional facades. Julie's honesty was disarming. "What's her prognosis?" They don't know yet. More tests, more waiting, more bills." Julie's voice remained steady, but Stephen saw the exhaustion beneath. "I don't tell you this for sympathy. I tell you because you deserve an honest answer about why I can't accept, even though working here has been the best professional experience I've had." "The best?" Stephen found himself wanting to hear more. "You actually listen. Most employers hear what they want to hear. You listen to what's actually being said. That's rare." Stephen should have let it go, should have accepted her refusal and moved on to the next candidate. Instead, he heard himself say, "What if I doubled the salary? Covered your mother's medical expenses through the company insurance?" "Why would you do that?" "Because losing you would be more expensive than keeping you." Julie studied him with those dark, intelligent eyes, searching for the catch. "What's really happening here, Mr. Mattison?" "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. Men like you don't hand out charity. There's always a reason." Stephen leaned back in his chair, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You remind me that not everyone is trying to take something from me. That's rare in my world. Maybe you've built a world that attracts the wrong people. Maybe I have." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither acknowledged. Julie broke it first, returning to her spreadsheet. "I'll think about your offer." She stayed. The weeks that followed blurred professional lines neither intended to cross. Late nights became their routine. Stephen would order dinner. Julie would argue that he was wasting money on expensive takeout when pizza worked fine. They'd eat surrounded by reports and projections, conversations drifting from profit margins to personal histories they'd both buried deep. One evening, Julie fell asleep at her desk, exhausted from juggling multiple jobs and her mother's care. Stephen found her there around midnight, head pillowed on her arms, breathing soft and even. He should have woken her, sent her home. Instead, he draped his jacket over her shoulders and continued working quietly so she could rest. She woke an hour later, disoriented, finding Stephen's jacket warm around her and him working across the room as if this were normal. "You should have woken me," she said, embarrassed. "You needed sleep more than I needed conversation." He didn't look up from his laptop. "Your third contract, the one with the shipping company. You should drop it. They're underpaying you, and the work is redundant to what you're doing here. I need the income. I'll match what they're paying. Consider it a bonus for the supply chain project. You've earned it." Julie studied him, trying to understand this man who kept surprising her. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Act like you don't care, then do something unexpectedly kind." Stephen finally looked at her, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "Maybe I'm trying to remember how." "My father died when I was young," Stephen admitted one night, staring at the city lights beyond his window. "His last words to me were that I'd never amount to anything, that I was weak just like my mother. I built all of this to prove him wrong, but he's not alive to see it, so what's the point?" Julie had set down her pen. "The point is you survived him. That's the real victory. You sound like you know something about surviving. Foster care," she said simply. 17 different homes before I aged out. Some good, most indifferent, a few terrible. I learned early that nobody stays. Everyone leaves eventually, so you better learn to stand alone. That's a lonely philosophy. It's a survival strategy. "Maybe," Stephen said quietly. "We've both been surviving when we could have been living." Julie looked at him then, really looked, and Stephen saw his own loneliness reflected back. Two people who'd armored themselves against the world, sitting in an empty office, pretending their connection was purely professional. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night in early winter. They'd been working on a critical project for months, one that would either revolutionize the company's distribution network or cost them millions in failed infrastructure. Julie had caught an error in the contractor's proposal that Stephen had missed, a single miscalculation that would have collapsed the entire system within months of implementation. "You just saved this company from a disaster," Stephen said, staring at her corrections in disbelief. "Just doing my job." "No, Julie, this is extraordinary work. This is—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Do you have any idea how brilliant you are?" She laughed, but it sounded uncomfortable. "I know how to spot problems. You know how to see what others miss. That's a gift. Mr. Mattison." "Stephen, please. I think we've earned first names by now." "Stephen," she tried, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. "Don't make this into something it's not." "What do you think this is? A good working relationship between employer and employee. Is that all you think this is?" Julie stood abruptly, gathering her papers. "It's late. I should go." But Stephen stood too, moving around his desk, closing the distance between them. "Julie, don't what?" "Don't make me hope for something that won't happen. I've had enough disappointment for one lifetime." "Who said it won't happen?" "Your entire life says it. You're Stephen Mattison. You don't do relationships or connections or anything that can't be calculated on a spreadsheet. Everyone knows that. What if I'm tired of being that person? Then you'll wake up tomorrow and remember why you built these walls in the first place. And I'll be the fool who believed you'd climb over them." Stephen reached out, his fingers barely grazing her arm. "What if I'm already climbing?" Julie's breath caught. They stood inches apart, the city glittering behind them, the office silent except for their breathing. Every rational thought in Stephen's mind screamed to step back, to maintain professional distance, to protect himself from the vulnerability threatening to crack his carefully constructed armor. Instead, he kissed her. Julie froze for half a heartbeat before kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was months of tension breaking like a dam. Two lonely people finding warmth in each other after years of cold. They made it to the leather couch in his office, clothes shed with fumbling urgency, whispered names replacing formal titles. Stephen traced the curve of her spine, memorized the sound of her breathing, and for the first time in his adult life, felt something besides the hollow satisfaction of winning. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling. "This changes everything," Julie whispered. "I know." "What happens tomorrow?" "I don't know," Stephen admitted, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her shoulder. "But tonight, can we pretend tomorrow doesn't exist?" Julie pressed closer, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Tonight we can pretend anything." They fell asleep there, wrapped in each other and borrowed warmth, neither knowing that tomorrow would shatter everything they'd found, that the life growing inside Julie would become the fault line that cracked them apart, that years later Stephen would remember this night and understand it was the last time he'd felt truly human before he chose to become the monster his father always said he was. The city lights continued their patterns outside. The office hummed with the quiet machinery of after-hours existence. And for a few borrowed hours, two people who'd learned not to trust anyone let themselves trust each other completely. But tonight, in the darkness of his office, with Julie's breath warm against his skin, Stephen Mattison let himself believe in second chances. Chapter 2. The Truth That Shatters Glass. Julie stood in her bathroom at dawn, staring at the plastic test in her trembling hands. The two pink lines blurred through her tears. She'd known, really, for weeks. Her body had been whispering truths she'd refused to hear. The exhaustion that coffee couldn't touch. The way certain smells made her stomach revolt. The tenderness that wouldn't fade. But knowing and confirming were different animals. She sat on the edge of her bathtub, phone in hand, thumb hovering over Stephen's name. They hadn't spoken about that night. The next morning, he'd woken early, dressed in silence, and left her a note saying he had an early meeting. The note was polite, distant, professional. Julie had understood the message. What happened was a mistake they'd both pretend never occurred. She'd kept that note, though she didn't know why. Folded it into her wallet behind her mother's hospital card, a reminder of the moment everything shifted. Sometimes she'd pull it out during sleepless nights, reading his neat handwriting, searching for warmth in the formal words. There was none. Just efficiency, just distance. She'd respected that boundary. Kept their interactions purely work-related, spoke only when necessary, felt the walls rebuild between them brick by brick. If Stephen noticed the way she couldn't meet his eyes anymore, he never mentioned it. If he wondered why she suddenly requested to work from home 3 days a week, he approved without question. Now those walls would crumble, whether she wanted them to or not. Julie spent 3 weeks rehearsing the conversation. She'd wake at night, script perfect phrases, imagine his responses, prepare her rebuttals. In her kindest fantasy, he'd be shocked but supportive. In her most realistic, he'd offer money and distance. In her darkest nightmares, the ones she tried not to acknowledge, he'd accuse her of orchestrating it all. She practiced in mirrors, speaking to her own reflection, trying to keep her voice steady. She wrote scripts on paper, then burned them in her kitchen sink, watching the words turn to ash. Nothing felt right. Nothing captured the complexity of what she needed to say. "I'm pregnant, I'm terrified, I need you, but I won't beg." Her mother called during those weeks, her voice weak from treatment. "You sound different, Mika. What's wrong?" Julie couldn't tell her, not yet. Not until she knew what Stephen would say, what path she'd be walking. Her mother had enough burdens without adding this uncertainty. She scheduled a meeting through his assistant. Personal matter, she'd written, hating how those two words contained a universe of fear. 15 minutes, his assistant replied. Between the board meeting and the investor calls. 15 minutes to tell a man he was going to be a father. 15 minutes to change both their lives. Julie dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple navy dress that didn't yet reveal the subtle changes to her body. She arrived at his office building with 10 minutes to spare, spent them in the bathroom vomiting from nerves rather than morning sickness, then rode the elevator up, trying to remember how to breathe. His assistant waved her through without small talk. Julie pushed open the heavy door to Stephen's corner office, that familiar space where they'd once talked for hours, where they'd crossed every professional line, where she'd felt safe enough to imagine something more. Stephen sat behind his massive desk, tablet in hand, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked older somehow, harder, like the man she'd known had been replaced by a marble statue. He didn't look up when she entered. Julie, what's this about? I have the investor call in 12 minutes. She stood in front of his desk, hands clasped to stop their shaking. I need to tell you something important. Can it wait? I'm reviewing critical data. Stephen, her voice cracked. Please look at me. He set down the tablet with visible irritation, removing his glasses, finally meeting her eyes. What is it? Julie had rehearsed this moment for weeks. None of those practice speeches mattered now. The words came out simple and raw. I'm pregnant. The baby is yours. The silence that followed felt alive, growing teeth, devouring the air between them. Stephen's face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion, realization, then something cold and calculating that made Julie's blood freeze. I see. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers like he was analyzing a bad investment. And you're certain it's mine? The question slapped her harder than a physical blow. That night was my first time in over 2 years. Yes, Stephen, I'm certain. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Right when your mother's medical expenses are at their peak. Julie felt something crack in her chest. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. You sleep with me once, get pregnant, and now you need financial support. Some might call that strategic. Some might call it biology, Julie said, her voice shaking with rage and hurt. We didn't use protection. Neither of us was thinking clearly. Oh, I think you were thinking very clearly. Stephen stood, his height suddenly intimidating rather than comforting. You saw an opportunity. A wealthy man, a moment of weakness, a lifetime meal ticket. How dare you? Julie stepped closer to his desk, tears streaming down her face. I came here because I thought you deserved to know. Because despite everything, I believed the man I met, the one who told me about his father, who listened when I talked about foster care. That man would want to know he was going to be a parent. That man was an illusion, Stephen said coldly. A momentary lapse in judgment. I don't do relationships, Julie. I certainly don't do families. And I won't be trapped into one by someone who's smart enough to know exactly how to manipulate me. I'm not manipulating you. I'm pregnant. This is real. Then handle it. He turned toward his window, dismissing her with his posture. You're an intelligent woman. You know your options. Choose whatever you want. But don't expect me to play father to a child I never wanted. Julie stood rooted, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. You never wanted? Stephen, this isn't about wanting. This is about reality. I'm having your baby. No. He turned back, his face carved from ice. You're having a baby. What you do with it is entirely your choice. But leave me out of your decision. I want no part of this fantasy you've constructed where I'm the supportive partner, where we play house, where I become someone I'm fundamentally not. I never asked you to be perfect. Julie whispered, her voice breaking. I just asked you to be present. I'm not built for this. Julie, my father was right about one thing. I'm better at building empires than building anything that requires a heart. He glanced at his watch. You have your answer. Now please leave. I have a call in 4 minutes. Julie stared at him, at this stranger wearing Stephen's face, speaking with Stephen's voice, but utterly unrecognizable. She thought about arguing, pleading, making him see reason, but the set of his jaw, the cold distance in his eyes, the way he'd already mentally dismissed her, it all told her the truth she didn't want to accept. She was alone. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly, not as a threat but as a certainty. "I doubt that. Not today. Maybe not even this year. But someday you'll realize what you threw away, and you'll understand that the real tragedy isn't that you lost me. It's that you never even tried to find yourself." Stephen's jaw tightened. "Goodbye, Julie." She walked to the door on legs that felt like water, her hand on the handle when his voice stopped her. "For what it's worth," he said, still facing away, "I did like the person I was when I was with you. But that person was weak, and I can't afford weakness." "That person was human," Julie replied, "and you'll spend the rest of your life trying to remember what that felt like." She left his office, took the elevator down, walked through the lobby where she'd entered so many mornings with hope and purpose, pushed through the glass doors into sunlight that felt cruel in its cheerfulness. The street bustled with people going about their days, unaware that Julie Johnson's world had just imploded. A street vendor was selling flowers on the corner, bright, cheerful bouquets that mocked her devastation. A couple walked past, hand in hand, laughing at something private between them. The world continued as if nothing had changed, as if her life hadn't just shattered into pieces she didn't know how to reassemble. She made it 3 blocks before collapsing against a building, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. One hand pressed to her stomach where a life grew that its father had just denied, vowing silently to the tiny cluster of cells that they'd survive this together, that she'd be enough even if he'd proven he was nothing. Chapter 3. The Door That Closes Forever. Julie's phone buzzed the next morning. A message from Stephen's assistant. Effective immediately, her contract was terminated. No explanation, no severance, just a clinical notification that her building access was revoked and her final payment would be processed. She'd expected it. Somehow that made it worse. For 3 days, Julie barely moved from her couch. She called in sick to her other contracts, couldn't force herself to eat, spent hours staring at nothing while her mind replayed every word Stephen had spoken. The cruelty of it hollowed her out. Not just the rejection, but the accusations, the suggestion that she'd planned this, engineered intimacy for profit. Her phone buzzed with concerned messages from her mother, from colleagues, from her landlord about rent. Julie ignored them all. She existed in a fog of shock and grief, mourning not just the relationship that never was, but the future she'd briefly let herself imagine. On the second night, she dreamed of her childhood, rotating through foster homes, learning that love was always conditional, always temporary. She woke understanding that Stephen's rejection wasn't a surprise. It was a pattern. People always left. She'd known this truth her entire life, had briefly forgotten it, and now remembered with brutal clarity. That hurt worse than abandonment. He'd reduced their connection to a transaction, made their night together cheap and calculated, turned her honesty into manipulation. On the 4th day, Julie forced herself to stand. She showered, dressed, made tea she couldn't drink, and opened her laptop. If Stephen thought destroying her career would make her disappear, he'd miscalculated. Julie Johnson had survived foster care, poverty, systemic barriers designed to break people like her. She'd survive him too. She spent the day applying to positions, reaching out to old contacts, rebuilding what he'd torn down. The responses were slower than usual. Word traveled fast in their industry. Nobody said it explicitly, but Julie understood. Associating with someone Stephen Mattison wanted gone was career suicide. Fine. She'd build something he couldn't touch. The ultrasound appointment came on a grey Tuesday. Julie went alone, lying on the examination table, while a technician spread cold gel across her barely showing stomach. The screen flickered to life, grainy images that meant nothing to Julie's untrained eye. Then she heard it. The heartbeat. Fast, strong, impossibly real. "Oh," the technician said, her voice brightening with surprise. "Well, this is wonderful." "What is?" "There are two more." "You're having triplets." The room tilted. Julie gripped the edge of the table, certain she'd misheard. "Triplets? Are you sure?" "Very sure. See here, here, and here. 3 distinct heartbeats. 3 babies. Congratulations." The technician kept talking, showing her each baby, measuring, pointing out tiny, developing features. Julie heard none of it. Her mind had shut down, unable to process this multiplication of impossibility. "Are they healthy?" Julie finally managed to ask. "From what I can see, everything looks perfect. You'll need to see a specialist for high-risk pregnancy, but right now, all 3 are developing beautifully." 3. Not one impossible situation, but 3. 3 babies to feed, clothe, shelter. 3 lives depending entirely on her. The technician continued talking, pointing out details, measuring, explaining things Julie couldn't process. Her mind had gone blank, stuck on one word: triplets. Not one baby, 3 lives depending on her. 3 tiny humans she'd have to feed, clothe, shelter, raise, alone. She drove home in a daze, parked in front of her apartment, and sat in her car for an hour. Then she screamed until her throat burned raw, until her voice cracked and gave out, until the fear and rage and terror had somewhere to go besides eating her alive from the inside. When the screaming stopped, she sat in silence, hands on her stomach. "Okay," she whispered to the 3 lives growing inside her. "Okay, we can do this. I don't know how yet, but we'll figure it out. I promise I'll figure it out." The eviction notice came the next week. Her landlord was polite but firm. Building policy didn't allow for single mothers with multiple infants. Too much noise, too much liability. She had 30 days. Julie spent those 30 days methodically losing everything. Her savings drained, paying for medical appointments, her basic insurance barely covered. Her remaining contracts ended when she couldn't hide her pregnancy symptoms anymore, couldn't maintain the energy required. She applied for assistance, filled out forms until her hand cramped, qualified for programs that had waiting lists measured in months. On day 28, she packed everything she owned into her car and drove to the women's shelter across town. The building was institutional, beige walls and fluorescent lights, and the defeated expressions of women who'd also lost everything. Julie checked in, received her assigned cot in a room shared with 11 other women, and lay down fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. She'd hit bottom. This was it. This was what Stephen's rejection had led to, a pregnant woman sleeping in a shelter, her entire world fitting into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Julie waited for the despair to consume her. Instead, she felt something else rising. Not hope, she wasn't naive enough for that, but determination, stubborn, furious determination. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survived worse than him. The next morning, Julie bought a cheap notebook and began planning. If traditional employment was closed to her, she'd create her own path. She started a blog that night, using the shelter's public computer, titling it Tripled Expectations. Her first post was raw. "I'm a single woman expecting triplets. Their father told me to handle it alone, so I am. This is me handling it." She posted about searching for bulk diapers at thrift stores, about free prenatal classes at the community clinic. When nurses looked at her with pity, she pretended not to see. About applying for subsidized housing, while knowing the waiting list was longer than her pregnancy. About crying in shelter bathrooms, then washing her face and pretending she was fine. She filmed herself building second-hand cribs from Craigslist, assembling them in the shelter's common area, while other women offered advice and encouragement. She shared the brutal honesty of her situation, terrified, broke, alone, but refusing to quit. The blog started small, 10 followers, then 50, then hundreds as her posts got shared. People connected with her refusal to play victim, her dark humor about her situation. her determination to survive what should have destroyed her. "Someone asked if I'm angry at the father," she wrote one night. "Of course I'm angry. I'm furious, but anger is expensive. It takes energy I need for building cribs and figuring out how to afford formula for 3 infants. So I'm putting the anger aside. Not forgiving, just focusing on what matters. These 3 lives depending on me." The comments flooded in. Women sharing their own stories. Single mothers offering advice. Strangers sending gift cards and baby items to the shelter's address. Julie didn't want charity, but she wasn't proud enough to refuse help that would keep her daughters fed. Daughters. The ultrasound had confirmed it. 3 girls. Julie spent hours researching names, lying on her shelter cot, one hand on her growing belly. She chose carefully Lara, Jean, and Kitty. Strong names. Names that meant they were warriors before they were even born. She said each name aloud in the darkness, testing how they sounded together. Lara, Jean, and Kitty Johnson, her daughters. Her 3 miracles. She wondered what they'd look like, what personalities they'd develop, whether they'd be best friends or rivals, or some complicated mixture of both. Sometimes other women in the shelter would gather around, offering their own baby name suggestions, debating meanings and origins. It was the first time since Stephen's rejection that Julie felt truly supported, surrounded by women who understood struggle, who celebrated her pregnancy instead of pitying it. "Strong names for strong girls," Rosa said approvingly. "They'll need strength, but they'll have it. Look at their mother. Your father chose not to know you," she whispered to her stomach one night. "That's his loss. His profound, terrible loss. You 3, you're going to be loved so completely that his absence won't leave holes. I'll fill every space with enough love for 2 parents." Stephen's name circulated occasionally in articles Julie couldn't help reading. New building acquisitions, profit increases, board meetings and investor calls, and the life of a man untouched by consequence. He'd moved on, forgotten her, maybe never thought about the baby he'd rejected. He didn't know about the triplets. Didn't know he'd told her to handle 1 child alone when she was carrying 3. Didn't know she was sleeping in a shelter, building a future from scraps, surviving exactly as he'd demanded. Julie told herself it didn't matter what he knew or didn't know. This wasn't about him anymore. But late at night, when her daughters kicked against her ribs and the shelter lights dimmed and sleep wouldn't come, she imagined him discovering the truth someday. Imagined him realizing exactly what he'd abandoned. The fantasy brought no satisfaction, only exhaustion. Revenge required energy she needed elsewhere. So Julie Johnson let Stephen Mattison fade into the past. Just another person who'd left when things got difficult. Another name on the long list of people who'd taught her that survival meant relying only on herself. She'd survived this too. Not for him, not to prove anything to him, but because 3 little girls deserved a mother who refused to break, no matter how many times the world tried to shatter her. Chapter 4. The World Multiplies. Pregnancy was war. Julie's body rebelled daily, mornings spent hunched over shelter toilets, exhaustion so deep she felt it in her bones. Carrying 3 babies meant everything was amplified. The hunger, the fatigue, the way her back screamed by afternoon. The anxiety that kept her awake counting problems she couldn't solve yet. But it also meant 3 times the motivation. She'd found a rhythm in the shelter. Wake early before others stirred, use the computer lab to work on her blog, attend prenatal appointments on clinic days, spend evenings in the common room researching childcare options she couldn't afford yet. The other women became her temporary family, sharing advice from their own experiences, watching her belly expand with awe and concern. "You're so small," Rosa said one evening, an older woman who'd been living there for months. "How are you carrying 3 babies?" "Stubbornness," Julie replied, making Rosa laugh. "You'll need more than that, Mija. You'll need help." "I'll manage." Nobody manages 3 babies alone. Not really. Julie wanted to argue, to prove she could handle anything, but her body betrayed her. She was already overwhelmed and they weren't even born yet. How would she feed 3 infants simultaneously, change 3 diapers, soothe 3 sets of cries on 3 hours of sleep? The fear was suffocating when she let herself feel it. So she didn't. She focused on immediate problems instead, finding affordable formula sources, researching WIC programs, learning about triple strollers and how to apply for childcare subsidies. Each small victory, each problem solved, built her confidence brick by brick. Her blog readership grew steadily. 5,000 followers became 10,000. Julie posted videos of herself in the shelter, talking candidly about the reality of her situation, showing the cramped quarters and shared bathrooms and institutional food. She wasn't trying to gain sympathy. She was documenting survival. "People keep asking why I'm sharing this publicly," she said in one video, her belly enormous now, face exhausted. "Because silence protects people who should be held accountable. Because other women in my situation need to know they're not alone. Because my daughters will someday see these videos and know their mother fought for them from the beginning." The comments shifted from sympathy to admiration. Brands started reaching out, small companies wanting to send products in exchange for mentions. Julie accepted only what she needed: diapers, formula, baby clothes. Everything else felt like charity she hadn't earned. One evening, a woman named Patricia found Julie in the computer lab. "You're the blogger," Patricia said. "The one with triplets coming. That's me. My daughter watches your videos. She's pregnant too, struggling. Seeing you survive gives her hope." Patricia paused, emotion thick in her voice. "Thank you for being honest about how hard this is." Julie felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm not trying to inspire anyone. I'm just trying to make it to tomorrow. That's exactly why you inspire people. You're not pretending it's easy. You're showing them it's possible." After Patricia left, Julie sat staring at her blog dashboard. 20,000 followers now. 20,000 people watching her life unfold. The weight of that felt enormous, but it also felt like purpose. She started posting more deliberately, thinking about what those 20,000 people needed to hear, how to find resources, how to navigate systems designed to make you quit, how to hold your head up when society said you should be ashamed. "I'm not ashamed," she told the camera one night. "I'm exhausted, I'm terrified, I'm overwhelmed. But I'm not ashamed of my daughters or my situation or fighting for a life that looks different than I planned. Shame is what people use to control you. I'm done being controlled." The video went viral. 50,000 views in 2 days. 100,000 by week's end. Suddenly, Julie Johnson wasn't just a blogger. She was a voice for women told they should suffer in silence. Local news reached out. Julie declined. National parenting magazines wanted interviews. She refused. This wasn't about fame. This was about survival. Then the pain started, early, too early, like knives in her abdomen. Julie woke at dawn, gasping, clutching her stomach. Rosa heard her and called for help. An ambulance came. Sirens screaming, shelter residents gathering in worried clusters as paramedics loaded Julie onto a stretcher. "My babies," she kept saying. "It's too soon. They can't come yet." "We're going to take care of you," the paramedic promised. The hospital was chaos, doctors, machines, urgent voices discussing terms Julie didn't understand. They stabilized her, stopped the early labor, put her on bed rest protocols. She stayed in the hospital for 5 days, monitored constantly, medication flowing through IVs, nurses checking on her hourly. A young nurse named Simone took special interest in Julie's case. During quiet night shifts, she'd sit beside Julie's bed and talk. "My sister had twins," Simone shared one evening. "Single mum too. It was brutal at first, but she made it through. You will too." "How did she do it?" She let people help. That was the hardest part for her, accepting that she couldn't do everything alone. She had to build a village, even when pride said she should handle it herself. Julie thought about that constantly. Her entire life had taught her self-reliance. Depending on others meant giving them power to disappoint you. But maybe, for her daughters, she needed to learn a different way. She posted from her hospital bed, Phone propped on the tray table, explaining what happened. "The doctor says the babies are okay for now," she told the camera, her voice shaking. "But carrying 3 means higher risks. I'm on strict bed rest until they're born, which means I can't work, can't even walk around much. I don't know how I'm going to manage this, but we'll figure it out. We always do." The comments exploded with support. People sending money she tried to refuse but desperately needed. Others sharing their own bed rest stories, offering advice and encouragement. One comment particularly struck her. "You keep saying I when you should be saying we. You have thousands of us with you. Let us help." Julie read that comment 17 times before crying herself to sleep. The shelter took her back on modified terms. They moved her to a quieter room, let her stay in bed most days, brought meals to her. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being homeless during bed rest. Julie spent those weeks planning obsessively. She created spreadsheets of expenses, mapped out schedules for 3 babies, researched every available resource. She contacted local organizations about subsidized housing, childcare assistance, formula programs. Each application filled out, each phone call made, was a small act of defiance against Stephen's expectation that she'd fail. Her blog transformed during bed rest. She couldn't film herself doing much, so she wrote instead. Long raw posts about fear and determination, about what it meant to choose life, even when life chose hardship, about refusing to let one man's rejection define her daughter's futures. "Their father said I'm alone," she wrote. "He's wrong. I have 20,000 people following this journey. I have shelter workers checking on me daily. I have women in this building who share their food and advice. I have strangers sending baby clothes and words of encouragement. That's not alone, that's community." One sleepless night, Julie opened a new document and started a business plan. She'd been surviving on blog income and donations, but that wasn't sustainable long term. She needed something stable, something she controlled, something that used her actual skills. By dawn, she had the outline, an online consulting service for small businesses, helping them optimize operations and supply chains. Something she could do from home with 3 infants. Something that leveraged everything she'd learned before Stephen destroyed her career. She named it Triple Threat Consulting. If she was going to survive having 3 babies alone, she might as well make it her brand. The plan was ambitious, maybe impossible, but Julie had stopped believing in impossible. Impossible was carrying triplets while homeless. Impossible was building a following from a shelter cot. Impossible was surviving daily when someone you'd trusted had told you to handle it alone. She'd already done impossible. Building a business was just the next step. Rosa visited during those bed rest weeks, bringing small gifts, a hand-knitted blanket, second-hand baby books, homemade soup. "You remind me of my daughter," Rosa said one afternoon, sitting beside Julie's bed. "She was stubborn like you, refused to accept defeat." "Was?" Julie asked gently. "She died giving birth. The baby survived, but she didn't make it." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "Her son is grown now, successful. Sometimes I wonder if she'd be proud of the man he became." "I'm sure she would be." "You're going to make it through this, Mija. You and your 3 girls. I feel it in my bones. And they're going to grow up knowing their mother was a warrior." After Rosa left, Julie placed her hands on her belly, feeling 3 distinct sets of movements. 3 separate little beings, each developing their own personalities already. "We're going to make it," she whispered. "All 4 of us. And someday, when you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you this whole story. The hard parts and the beautiful parts. And you'll know that you were wanted, so desperately wanted, and that your mother never gave up, even when giving up would have been easier." Chapter 5. The Empire Cracks. Labor started on a Thursday afternoon, early but not dangerously so. Julie was alone in her shelter room when the first real contraction hit, different from false alarms, unmistakable in its intensity. She grabbed her packed bag, called for Rosa, and walked slowly to the lobby where an ambulance was already waiting. Rosa held her hand during the ride, murmuring prayers in Spanish, squeezing back when Julie's contractions peaked. "You're going to be okay, mija. Your babies are coming. They're ready to meet their mama." The hospital room was sterile white, machines beeping, nurses moving with practiced efficiency. Julie's doctor came quickly, checking her progress, explaining what would happen next. "Triplets usually mean cesarean section," Dr. Palmer said gently. "It's safer for them and for you." Julie nodded, too overwhelmed to argue. Fear clutched at her throat. She'd read about C-sections, watched videos, prepared as much as one could prepare. But preparation and reality were different creatures. The surgical suite, the anesthesia, the vulnerability of being cut open while conscious, it all terrified her in ways she couldn't voice. A nurse noticed her panic. "Hey, look at me. You're going to be amazing. In less than an hour, you'll meet your babies. Focus on that." "I'm alone," Julie whispered. "No, you're not. We're all here with you. Every person in that operating room is here to make sure you and your babies are safe. You're not alone." They wheeled her to surgery. Bright lights overhead, strangers surrounding her, numbing her lower body while she stayed conscious and terrified. "I'm here," a nurse said, holding her hand. "You're doing great." Then she heard it, the first cry. Thin and reedy and absolutely perfect. "Baby A," someone announced. "It's a girl." Julie started crying. Then the second cry, stronger. "Baby B," another girl. "One more," the nurse said, squeezing Julie's hand. "One more, Mama." The third cry came softer, delayed just enough to spike Julie's fear before the sound filled the room. Baby C-girl number 3. "They're all here." They brought them to her one by one, tiny bodies wrapped in hospital blankets. Lara, Jean, and Kitty, her daughters, her 3 miracles. Julie looked at their perfect faces, their tiny fingers curling instinctively around hers, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Stephen Mattison had no idea these 3 existed. Didn't know he'd rejected not 1 child but 3. Didn't know he'd left her to deliver triplets alone, to recover from surgery in a hospital room, without a partner to hold her hand or share the overwhelming joy and terror. "Can I take a picture?" Julie asked the nurse. "Of course, Mama." Julie took dozens of photos with her phone, images of 3 swaddled babies laid side by side, their faces peaceful in sleep. She posted one to her blog with a simple caption, "Lara, Jean, and Kitty Johnson. Born today, perfect, we did it." The post exploded. Hundreds of thousands of views within hours. Comments pouring in from followers who'd watched her entire journey, celebrating with her, crying with her, sharing in the victory of survival. Julie spent 4 days in the hospital, learning how to nurse 3 babies, how to change diapers with surgical incisions healing, how to function on minutes of sleep. The nurses were patient, teaching her tricks for managing multiples, helping her develop systems. One nurse, an older woman named Grace, spent extra time with Julie during night shifts when the hospital quieted and exhaustion felt most overwhelming. "My first night alone with my twins. I cried for 4 hours straight," Grace shared, while showing Julie how to position 2 babies for tandem feeding. "Thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Thought I couldn't do it." "What changed?" Julie asked. "Nothing changed. I just kept going. 1 diaper, 1 feeding, 1 moment at a time. Eventually those moments added up to days, then weeks, then years. Now my twins are grown with their own children. It passes faster than you think." Julie tried to imagine that future, Lara, Jean, and Kitty grown, maybe with families of their own. The image felt impossible and comforting simultaneously. "You're a natural," Dr. Palmer said during discharge rounds, "but don't be afraid to ask for help." "I don't have anyone to ask," Julie replied honestly. "Then reach out to support groups, other mothers of multiples. Nobody does this alone, but Julie was doing it alone. The shelter had agreed to take her back with 3 infants, but only temporarily while she found permanent housing. She had maybe 6 weeks before they'd need the space for other women. 6 weeks to find an apartment, secure childcare, launch her consulting business, and somehow not collapse from exhaustion. She posted about the reality of those first weeks. The videos showed her at 3 in the morning, feeding 2 babies while the third cried, her hair unwashed, eyes hollow with fatigue. She talked about the physical pain of recovery, the mental strain of constant infant needs. The moment she sobbed in the bathroom because she couldn't hold all 3 crying babies simultaneously. "I'm not going to lie and say this is beautiful," she told the camera during one particularly rough night. "This is survival. This is brutal. This is 3 humans depending entirely on me, while my body is still healing and my brain is running on fumes. But we're doing it. Every day we're still here is a victory." Her honesty resonated. The blog hit 1 million followers. Companies reached out with sponsorship offers. News outlets wanted her story. Julie accepted only what helped. Formula companies, diaper brands, baby product sponsors that paid enough for her to afford a small apartment. Meanwhile, across town in a world Julie had stopped thinking about, Stephen Mattison's empire was beginning to crack. It started small, an anonymous email to a journalist containing details about a pregnant employee who'd been fired abruptly. The journalist did some digging, found Julie's blog through search algorithms, connected the timeline. The article published on a slow news day. Billionaire Stephen Mattison abandoned pregnant employee after intimate relationship. The headline was clickbait, but the story beneath it was thorough. The journalist had pulled employment records through sources, matched dates, found Julie's blog posts that never named Stephen, but clearly referenced a powerful employer. The article didn't make explicit claims, just presented facts and let readers draw conclusions. Those conclusions came fast and furious. Stephen's social media exploded. Thousands of comments linking to Julie's blog, to videos of her struggling with 3 newborns, to posts documenting her homelessness and survival. People compared timelines, noted how she'd been fired immediately after that mysterious personal matter meeting, watched her deliver triplets alone, while Stephen attended galas and investment summits. The narrative crystallized overnight. Wealthy CEO impregnates employee, fires her, abandons her to poverty while living in luxury, and the internet was not kind. Stephen's company stock dropped 3 points in one day. Sponsors pulled out of his upcoming charity event. Board members called emergency meetings. Protesters gathered outside his building with signs reading, "Deadbeat billionaire" and "Support your children." His crisis management team worked overtime, drafting statements, managing media, trying to contain damage. They released something carefully worded. Mr. Mattison disputes these characterizations and maintains that any personal matters are private. It made things worse. The statement sounded cold, corporate, exactly like what a man who'd abandoned a pregnant woman would say. Julie watched it all unfold from her small apartment, feeding babies and scrolling through headlines, feeling nothing like satisfaction. If anything, she felt hollow. This wasn't justice. This was spectacle. Stephen wasn't facing consequences. He was facing bad publicity, which his money would eventually erase. But then the video went viral. Julie had posted it weeks before, just her singing to 3 sleepy toddlers before nap time. Her voice was terrible, the song some made-up nonsense about butterflies and dreams. But Lara, Jean and Kitty watched her with absolute devotion. Tiny faces turned toward their mother, like she was their entire world. The comments on that video ranged from supportive to angry. Thousands of people tagged Stephen's corporate accounts, demanding he see what he'd abandoned. Others shared it with news outlets, celebrities, influencers. The video became a symbol, not just of single motherhood, but of resilience against abandonment, of love persisting despite rejection. A prominent activist shared it with the caption, "This is what strength looks like. Remember her face when you see his." The video had 3 million views when Stephen's assistant sent him the link. He watched it alone in his penthouse, whiskey in hand, watching Julie's face full of exhausted love, watching 3 little girls who looked unmistakably like his mother, his sister, himself. He watched their hands reaching for Julie, heard their babbling attempts at words, saw the devotion in their eyes, and Stephen Mattison, who'd built an empire by never letting emotion dictate business, who'd trained himself to feel nothing that couldn't be quantified, who'd rejected a pregnant woman because vulnerability felt like weakness. He finally understood what he'd done. Chapter 6, The Reckoning of Recognition. Stephen played the video 17 times before he could force himself to close it. Each replay carved deeper into something he'd convinced himself didn't exist anymore: conscience. Lara had his mother's nose. Jean had his eye shape, unmistakable. Kitty had the dimple his father used to have before alcohol, and anger consumed him. These weren't just 3 random children. These were his daughters, his blood, his legacy, and he'd told their mother to handle it alone. The penthouse suddenly felt suffocating. 70 floors above the city he'd conquered, surrounded by art worth millions and furniture that cost more than most people earned yearly. Stephen stood at his window and vomited in his $8,000 sink. He'd abandoned 3 children, told their mother to go have the baby alone when she was carrying triplets, left her homeless, penniless, struggling through pregnancy and delivery and newborn care without a shred of support, while he attended board meetings and celebrated profit margins. His phone buzzed constantly. Board members demanding crisis control, investors threatening to pull funding, his mother calling from her retirement home, her voice brittle with disappointment. Stephen ignored them all, watching that video again, studying his daughters' faces, trying to comprehend the magnitude of his cruelty. The media storm intensified daily. Every business decision he made got scrutinized through this new lens. Protesters camped outside his building. Think pieces proliferated about wealthy men abandoning responsibility. His face became a meme, a symbol of callous privilege. One evening, Stephen stood in his living room and looked around at everything he'd built. The imported furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a view of the city that cost more per month than Julie's entire apartment probably did. All of it suddenly looked hollow, meaningless, empty monuments to a life spent accumulating things instead of connections. He walked to his study and pulled out an old photo album he'd kept buried in a drawer. His mother, young and smiling, holding him as a toddler. His father in the background, already wearing the expression of disappointed cruelty that would define Stephen's childhood. He'd spent his entire life trying not to become his father, and in the process had become exactly that, someone who abandoned his family when they needed him most. Stephen hired a crisis management firm. They came with PowerPoint presentations and damage control strategies. "You need to make a statement," the lead consultant said. "Show remorse. Acknowledge the situation." "I don't want to make a statement," Stephen replied. "I want to fix this. Mr. Mattison, with respect, you can't fix this. You can only minimize further damage. I have 3 daughters I didn't know existed. That's not damage. That's reality." The consultant exchanged glances with her team. "Sir, according to public record and blog posts, you were informed of the pregnancy. You chose not to be involved. That's not the same as not knowing. I didn't know about the triplets. Does that meaningfully change your culpability?" Stephen had no answer. The consultant was right. He'd rejected Julie and their unborn child. Whether that child turned out to be 1 baby or 3 didn't absolve him of the cruelty of that rejection. His attorneys advised him to stay away from Julie and the children, warning that any contact could be seen as admission of paternity and open him to legal claims. Stephen fired those attorneys. He didn't need protection from responsibility. He needed to understand how to carry it. He started following Julie's blog obsessively, reading every post from the beginning, watching every video. He saw her journey from his office to homelessness to single motherhood. Saw her build a business from nothing, create a community from isolation, survive what should have destroyed her. She never mentioned his name, never sought public sympathy by revealing his identity. When followers asked about the father, she simply said, "He's not in the picture. That's his choice." That restraint shamed him more than the protests ever could. Stephen hired a private investigator, not to find dirt, but to understand. Where Julie lived, how she supported herself, whether the children had what they needed. The investigator returned with a thorough report. Modest apartment, growing consulting business, adequate resources, but nothing comfortable. She was surviving, not thriving. The investigator included an address. Stephen drove to her neighborhood one Saturday morning, staying in his car, watching from a distance. Julie emerged from a small duplex pushing a triple stroller. 3 children strapped in, wearing mismatched clothes, one crying while the other 2 babbled. She looked exhausted, hair pulled back messily, wearing yoga pants and an old sweatshirt. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Not because of physical appearance, though she was stunning despite exhaustion. Beautiful because of what she represented: survival, strength, unconditional love, given freely to children whose father had offered nothing but rejection. Stephen watched her push the stroller to a small park, saw her lift the girls onto swings, pushing all 3 in rotation, kissing scraped knees when Jean fell, wiping ice cream from Kitty's face, holding Lara when she got upset about sharing toys. She was mother and father both, filling every role alone because he'd forced her to. He sat in his luxury car, wearing $1,000 clothes, and understood that Julie possessed wealth he could never purchase: purpose, love, connection to 3 tiny humans who depended on her absolutely. She was doing it. Everything he'd said she couldn't do. Everything he'd implied was a trap or manipulation or calculated play for his money. She was raising their daughters alone, building a life despite his cruelty, thriving without him. The realization gutted him. As Stephen watched, an older woman approached Julie at the park. They talked for a few minutes, the woman gesturing to the triplets with obvious admiration. Julie smiled, that genuine smile Stephen remembered from their nights working together. The woman said something that made Julie laugh, a real laugh, the kind that came from joy rather than obligation. Julie had rebuilt a life, found community, created happiness from ashes, and Stephen had no part in any of it. Stephen waited until she'd packed the children back into the stroller and started walking home. Then he got out of his car, heart hammering, and walked toward her. Julie noticed him when he was 20 feet away. She stopped abruptly, her entire body going rigid. For a moment neither moved, just stared at each other across the suburban sidewalk. Then Julie turned the stroller around and walked away. "Julie, please," Stephen called, following her. "I just want to talk." "No, please. Just 5 minutes?" She spun back, her face carved from stone. "I said no. Stay away from my children." "Our children," Stephen said quietly. The words hung between them. Julie's hands tightened on the stroller handles. "You made it very clear they weren't yours. You told me to handle it alone, so that's what I'm doing. Now leave us alone." "I was wrong. I know I was wrong." "Let me help." "Help?" Julie laughed, sharp and bitter. "You want to help now? Where were you when I was homeless? When I was in labor? When I spent the first month after surgery, unable to lift all 3 babies because I was recovering alone? You don't get to show up now that the hard part is over and pretend you care." "The hard part isn't over," Stephen said. "Raising children is—" "Don't you dare lecture me about raising children. I've been doing it without you, successfully. We don't need your guilt money or your sudden interest or whatever crisis of conscience brought you here." "I want to know them," Stephen said, his voice cracking. "I want to be their father. You're not their father. You're the man who denied their existence." Julie leaned close, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "You accused me of trapping you, of manufacturing this to steal your money. You called our night together a mistake. You told me to handle the baby alone when I was carrying 3. You fired me. You abandoned us completely. Now you see videos going viral and suddenly you care? It's not about the videos. I saw them and realized you were wrong, that your daughters exist, that I wasn't lying or manipulating you." Julie shook her head. "You're so many years too late. They don't know you. They don't need you. And I sure as hell don't want you anywhere near us. She turned the stroller again. This time Stephen didn't follow. He stood on the sidewalk, watching her disappear around the corner, watching his daughter's heads bobbing in the stroller, watching his chance at redemption walk away. When she was gone, Stephen sat on a bench and buried his face in his hands. A jogger passed by, giving him a wide berth. A dog barked in the distance. Life continued around him while his own world crumbled. He pulled out his phone and looked at his calendar. Meetings, calls, obligations that suddenly meant nothing. He deleted them all, one by one, until the calendar was blank. Then he searched for something he'd never looked for before: how to be a better person. Chapter 7. The Hunt That Finds Nothing. Stephen couldn't stop thinking about them. 3 little girls wearing mismatched clothes, their faces mirror images of family members he'd lost, growing up blocks away from his penthouse yet universes apart. He tried again. This time, he showed up at her apartment on a Tuesday morning, arms loaded with toys from an expensive boutique. Designer dolls, educational games, plush animals that cost more than a week of groceries. He'd spent hours selecting items, imagining tiny hands reaching for them, imagining being welcomed instead of rejected. Julie answered the door, holding Lara on her hip, Jen and Kitty playing behind her in a living room visible through the doorway. She looked at Stephen, looked at the pile of gifts, and something like exhaustion crossed her face. "Money was all you had to give then," she said quietly. "I don't need it now. What I needed was a partner. What my daughters needed was a father who wanted them. You can't purchase that retroactively. I know I can't buy forgiveness. Then why are you here with expensive toys? What do you think this accomplishes?" Stephen stood there, arms full of gifts, realizing she was right. He looked foolish, desperate, exactly like a man who thought problems could be solved with credit cards and grand gestures. "I don't know what else to do," he admitted. "Try actually changing," Julie said. "Try becoming someone who deserves to know them, not buying things. Being better." She closed the door gently. The gifts sat on her porch until rain ruined them. Stephen stood outside her building for 20 minutes, staring at the closed door before finally walking back to his car. A neighbor watched him from across the street, clearly recognizing him from news coverage, her expression a mixture of curiosity and judgment. He tried email next, professional, measured messages about co-parenting arrangements and support. He outlined financial proposals, suggested schedules, tried to sound reasonable rather than emotional. Julie responded with one line: "My children don't need a stranger who once denied their existence. They need stability, not your guilt." Each rejection felt like another layer of his armor being stripped away. Stephen had spent his adult life protecting himself from vulnerability, from pain, from the risk of becoming his father. Now he was drowning in all of it. He tried sending flowers. Julie donated them to a nursing home. He tried leaving voice messages. Julie blocked his number. Every attempt was met with silence or rejection, and Stephen understood why. He'd earned this. Every closed door, every unanswered message, every moment of being shut out, it was exactly what he deserved. One evening, Stephen found himself at a bookstore, standing in the parenting section, reading titles about fatherhood and child development. A woman beside him noticed, smiled sympathetically. "First time dad?" she asked. Something like that. "My advice? Just be present. Kids don't need perfect parents. They need parents who show up." The words echoed in Stephen's mind for days. Show up, be present. Everything he hadn't been. He tried showing up at her consulting business launch event, a small gathering at a local community center celebrating her company's first year. Stephen stood in the back, wearing casual clothes instead of his usual suits, trying to blend in with the modest crowd of supporters and clients. Julie was giving a speech about resilience when she noticed him. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes meeting his across the room. The tension was palpable. Everyone followed her gaze to where Stephen stood. "Success isn't about never falling," Julie said, her voice steady, but her eyes locked on Stephen. "It's about who stays when you do. Some people leave the moment things get complicated. Those people don't earn the right to return when your life looks easier. They forfeited that right by choosing comfort over commitment. The crowd applauded. Several people glanced at Stephen, clearly recognizing him from news coverage, putting pieces together. He felt their judgment like physical weight. Security approached politely. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I understand," Stephen said quietly. He left without argument, the sound of celebration fading behind him. In the parking lot, he sat in his car and watched through windows as Julie smiled and laughed with people who'd supported her journey. She looked happy, genuinely happy. The kind of happiness money couldn't buy and power couldn't command. She'd built a life without him, a good life. She didn't need him disrupting it with his guilt and late realizations. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it brought something worse, irrelevance. Stephen drove home, but instead of his penthouse, he found himself parked outside the park where he'd first seen Julie with the girls. He sat on the same bench, watching other families play, fathers pushing children on swings, mothers chasing toddlers, couples sharing the load of parenting. He'd given that up. Not just given it up, actively rejected it, scorned it, called it a trap. A man sat down on the bench beside him, bouncing a baby girl on his knee. "Beautiful day," the man said cheerfully. "Yeah," Stephen replied. "Your kid here somewhere?" Stephen looked at the playground, scanning for his daughters, even though he knew they wouldn't be there. "No, I don't get to see them. A rough custody situation?" "Something like that." The man nodded sympathetically. "My brother went through that. Missed so much of his son's life. He regrets it every day. How does he live with that?" "So by showing up anyway, even when his ex makes it hard, even when his son doesn't remember him. He shows up, proves he's changed, proves he's reliable. It's been almost 2 years of consistency. Now his son asks for him, wants to spend time with him. It's not perfect, but it's healing." Stephen watched the man's daughter giggle and reach for her father's face. "What if you don't deserve that healing?" Probably nobody does. But kids deserve fathers who try. That's what matters. The man stood, tossing his daughter gently in the air, catching her while she shrieked with joy. They walked toward the playground together, leaving Stephen alone on the bench. "Try actually changing," Julie had said. "Not buying things. Being better." Stephen pulled out his phone and searched for volunteer opportunities, not high-profile charity galas where he'd write checks and make speeches. Real volunteer work, physical labor, direct service. He found a community center that provided meals and childcare for single parents. They needed kitchen help, set-up assistance, basic labor, nothing glamorous, nothing that would make headlines or repair his reputation. Stephen signed up for the next shift. When he arrived home that night, his penthouse felt emptier than ever. He walked through rooms filled with expensive things that meant nothing, stopped in front of a mirror, and barely recognized the man staring back. "Who are you?" he asked his reflection. "Who have you become?" The man in the mirror had no answer. But for the first time in years, Stephen wanted to find out. Chapter 8. The Doors That Won't Open. The community center smelled like industrial cleaner and home cooking. Stephen arrived in jeans and an old shirt, reporting to a volunteer coordinator who barely looked up from her clipboard. "Name?" "Stephen Mattison." Her head snapped up. Recognition flickered across her face, quickly replaced by professional neutrality. "Right, you'll be in the kitchen, washing dishes, helping prep. Sound good?" "Perfect. We're short-staffed today, so you'll work hard. This isn't a photo op." "I understand." She studied him for a moment, clearly skeptical. "All right then. Kitchen's through there." The work was monotonous and grueling. Mountains of dishes from feeding 100 struggling families, steam from industrial sinks, burns from hot water. Stephen's hands, accustomed to signing documents and shaking hands in boardrooms, blistered within the first hour. He kept washing, Around him, other volunteers worked with practiced efficiency. They chatted about their lives, their families, their struggles. Stephen listened, realizing how insulated his world had been. These weren't success stories. These were survival stories. People working multiple jobs, juggling childcare, fighting systems designed to keep them trapped. One volunteer, a younger man named Warner, noticed Stephen struggling with the industrial faucet. "Here, turn it like this. Take some getting used to." "Thanks." Stephen watched Warner work, efficient and unbothered by the steam and heat. "How long have you been volunteering?" "Since I got out. Did some time, came back, couldn't find work. This place gave me purpose when nobody else would give me a chance." Stephen nodded, humbled. He'd spent years judging people, reducing them to their mistakes, never considering what redemption might require. A woman working beside him glanced over. "First time volunteering?" "That obvious." "Your hands aren't used to this work." She showed her own hands, scarred and strong. "I'm Elena, been coming here for 3 years. "Stephen, I know who you are." Her voice held no judgment, just fact. "Saw the news coverage." Stephen tensed. "I deserved it all." "Maybe, but you're here now. That's something." They worked in companionable silence, falling into rhythm. Elena told him about her own story. Single mother of twins, working 3 jobs, depending on this center for childcare while she tried to finish nursing school. "Must be hard," Stephen said. "Life's hard for most people. Rich folks just don't see it usually." She handed him another stack of dishes. "What brought you here? Just trying to fix your reputation?" "Trying to figure out how to be better." Better is an action, not a thought. Better is showing up, doing the work, not expecting applause. Stephen nodded, understanding she was testing him, seeing if he'd quit when the work got tedious. He didn't quit. He washed dishes for 4 hours, helped fold tables, mopped floors. By the end of his shift, his back ached and his hands were raw. "Same time next week?" the coordinator asked. "I'll be here." He came back next week, and the week after, and the one after that. No press, no fanfare, just Stephen Mattison washing dishes and setting up chairs and carrying boxes, while exhausted single parents brought their children for free meals and safe spaces. He started attending therapy, something he'd always dismissed as indulgent. His therapist, Dr. Walsh, didn't coddle him. "Why did you push Julie away?" she asked during their 3rd session. "I was scared." "Of what?" Stephen stared at his hands, still raw from volunteer work. "Of becoming my father. He was cruel, controlling, loveless. I watched him destroy my mother with indifference. I swore I'd never be like him, so when Julie told me she was pregnant, all I could see was my father's face, his failures, his cruelty. I panicked." "So you became exactly what you feared." The words hit like a physical blow. "Yes." Dr. Walsh leaned forward. "Tell me about your mother. What happened to her?" Stephen's throat tightened. "She died when I was 16. Cancer. My father never visited her in the hospital, said weakness disgusted him. She died asking for him, and he was at a bar. And you think loving Julie would make you like him?" "I think needing anyone makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability means pain. It also means connection, joy, love, everything that makes life worth living." Dr. Walsh's voice softened. "You rejected Julie because you were afraid of becoming cruel, but rejection is the cruelest act. You became your father by trying not to." Stephen sat with that truth, feeling it settle into his bones. "What are you going to do about that?" "I don't know. She won't talk to me, won't let me near the children. I've tried apologizing." "Apologizing isn't action," Dr. Walsh said. "It's words. What actions are you taking to prove you've changed?" Stephen told her about the community center, about showing up weekly, doing thankless work, listening to other parents' struggles, about how it was teaching him what he'd never learned, That fatherhood wasn't about providing money, it was about providing presence. Good, Dr. Walsh said. Keep doing that, not for Julie's approval, not to earn access to your daughters. Do it because it's making you into someone who deserves those things. Months passed. The media attention faded. New scandals replaced Stevens. His company stabilized, but he found himself caring less about profit margins and more about the single father he worked beside on Thursdays, the one juggling 2 jobs while trying to stay present for his son. "How do you do it?" Stephen asked him one evening. "You just do," the man replied, "because not doing it isn't an option. They need you, so you show up. Even when you're exhausted, even when you feel like failing, you show up." Stephen thought about that constantly, about showing up, about consistency, about being needed and choosing to meet that need instead of running from it. One evening at the community centre, Stephen heard someone mention an upcoming gala, the Metro Area Children's Fund, massive charity event supporting programs for struggling families. He remembered Julie was involved somehow, had heard her name mentioned in connection with family advocacy work. "You going to that?" Elena asked, noticing his interest. "I'm thinking about it." Don't go to cause problems. If you're going to, show up in her world. Show up as someone different than who you were. Stephen bought a ticket, not as sponsor or donor or guest of honor, just as attendee number 347, seated in back, planning to observe rather than participate, wanting only to see her recognized for what she'd built from the ashes he'd left her in. The gala was several weeks away. Stephen spent those weeks continuing his routine, therapy, volunteer work, learning to be someone different than the man who'd rejected his pregnant partner because vulnerability felt dangerous. He stopped checking his stock values, stopped obsessing over board meetings, stopped caring about empire building. His life had been spent constructing monuments to success while demolishing everything that mattered. He'd been rich in money and bankrupt in humanity. Now he was trying to reverse that equation. "Why do you keep coming back?" Elena asked one Thursday, watching him scrub particularly stubborn pans. "Because this is where I should be." "Most rich guys do one shift and never return. You've been here for months." "I'm not trying to be most rich guys." Elena smiled slightly. "You're learning, slowly, but you're learning." She paused, then added quietly, "My twins' father left too. Before they were born. I was angry for years, wasted so much energy hating him. Then I realized he's missing everything beautiful. Their first words, first steps, first days of school. He chose absence. I chose presence. I won." Stephen looked at her, this woman who turned abandonment into victory through sheer determination. "Do your kids ask about him?" "Sometimes. I tell them the truth. Their father wasn't ready to be what they needed. But I was, and that's enough." "Is it really enough?" Has to be. Can't give them what doesn't exist. Can only give them what does. Me, every single day, showing up." Stephen hoped she was right. He hoped that somewhere, somehow, Julie might hear about his consistency, his changed behavior, his genuine effort to become better. But hoping wasn't enough. Hope required action. The gala was approaching. Stephen pressed his modest suit, left his luxury watch at home, prepared to sit in the back of a ballroom and watch the woman he'd destroyed be celebrated for surviving him. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was witness. And sometimes witness was where transformation began. Chapter 9. The Transformation Without Applause. Stephen arrived at the Riverside Convention Center as evening settled, wearing his modest suit, carrying no expectations. The ballroom glowed warm against December cold, chandeliers casting soft light over tables decorated simply but beautifully. 800 people mingled, the atmosphere one of genuine celebration rather than obligatory charity. He found his seat at table 43, tucked in the back corner near the kitchen entrance. His table mates introduced themselves. A teacher, a small business owner, a nurse, a retired firefighter. Regular people who donated modest amounts, who believed in the cause. They chatted about the organization's work, about families helped, about Julie Johnson's remarkable advocacy. "Have you heard her speak?" the teacher asked Stephen. "No, she's incredible. So honest about struggle. Makes you want to do more, be better?" Stephen nodded, unable to find words. The nurse beside him noticed his discomfort. "You okay? You look nervous." "Just grateful to be here," Stephen managed. The lights dimmed. Music swelled. A video played, showing families helped by the fund. Single mothers finishing education, fathers finding stable employment, children accessing programs that changed trajectories. The stories were powerful, real, filled with messy truth rather than sanitized inspiration. Stephen recognized some of the families from the community center where he volunteered. Seeing their journeys documented this way, understanding how interconnected these support systems were, made him realize how little he'd understood about the world most people lived in. Then Julie appeared on stage. Stephen's breath caught. She wore a deep emerald dress that made her skin glow, her hair styled elegantly, confidence radiating from her posture. She wasn't the exhausted woman from the park or the struggling blogger from years ago. She was powerful, self-assured, someone who'd survived fire and emerged forged in strength. "Thank you all for coming," Julie began, her voice carrying easily through the ballroom. "We're here tonight to celebrate something beautiful, community. Not charity, community. The difference matters. Charity says, I'm helping you because you're beneath me. Community says, I'm helping you because we're in this together." The crowd applauded. Julie smiled, looking genuinely moved. "Most of you know my story. Single mother of triplets, started with nothing, built something sustainable through sheer stubbornness and the support of people who refused to let me fail." She paused, emotion flickering across her face. "But tonight isn't about my story. It's about the hundreds of families whose stories are still being written, who need community rather than judgment, who deserve support without shame." She introduced families who'd been helped by the fund, a father who'd lost his job and found new purpose through job training programs, a mother who'd escaped abuse and rebuilt her life through subsidized housing and childcare, a teenager who'd graduated high school despite homelessness, now attending college on scholarship. Each story shattered Stephen further. He watched these people thank Julie for believing in them, for creating systems that helped rather than humiliated, for understanding struggle, because she'd lived it. The teacher beside Stephen leaned over and whispered, "She's the reason I started donating. Reading her blog changed how I see my students' struggles." "She's remarkable," Stephen said, his voice thick. "She is. Makes you wonder about the father, though. What kind of person abandons someone like her?" Stephen felt his face flush. The nurse shot the teacher a sharp look, clearly recognizing who Stephen was, shaking her head slightly. The teacher's eyes widened in realization. "I'm sorry, don't apologize," Stephen said quietly. "You're right to wonder. The answer is someone who was broken and chose to break others rather than fix himself." Awkward silence settled over their table. Stephen kept his eyes on Julie, watching her introduce the next family, her compassion evident in every word. In the front row, 3 little girls sat with a woman Stephen didn't recognize. Laura, Jean, and Kitty, wearing matching red dresses, barely able to sit still. Almost 3 years old now, beautiful and alive and growing up without knowing their father existed. Stephen's heart physically ached watching them. Lara whispered to Jean, who giggled. Kitty waved at someone across the room. They were real, complete little humans, with personalities and preferences and inner lives, not abstract concepts, not problems to solve. His daughters. Julie finished introducing the families and paused, looking at her notes. "I have one more thing to say before we hear from our keynote speaker. Something personal." The room quieted. Stephen leaned forward instinctively. When I started this journey, I was angry. Angry at circumstances, at betrayal, at how hard everything was. That anger felt justified, and maybe it was. But anger is exhausting. It takes energy I needed elsewhere. So I made a choice. I would focus on building rather than burning, on creating rather than destroying, on teaching my daughters that strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting up, brushing off, and choosing to move forward anyway. She looked directly at her daughters, her expression softening. Lara, Jean, Kitty, if you're watching this someday when you're older, I want you to know you were wanted, so desperately wanted, by me. Everything I built, so you would have a life where love was abundant and shame was absent. You are my 3 reasons, always. The ballroom erupted in applause. People wiped tears. Stephen's vision blurred. He watched his daughters clap along with everyone else, not understanding yet that their mother's words were about them, for them, a promise she'd kept every single day. Then Julie's eyes swept the room and landed on him. She froze mid-gesture. The smile dropped from her face. The entire atmosphere shifted as the audience sensed the tension, heads turning to follow her gaze to where Stephen sat in the back corner. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The applause died. 800 people watched this silent exchange between a woman who'd survived and the man who'd tried to destroy her. Stephen stood before conscious thought, before he could stop himself. His chair scraped loudly in the silence. The retired firefighter at his table grabbed his arm. "Think carefully about what you're doing, son," the man said quietly. "I have," Stephen replied. "For months now. This is the only thing I'm certain of." He walked forward, each step feeling impossible, his heart hammering so loud he could barely hear his own thoughts. Security moved to intercept, but Julie raised one hand, stopping them. The ballroom went completely silent. Conversation died like dominoes falling. Every eye fixed on Stephen as he climbed the stage stairs. He took the microphone from Julie's motionless hands, faced 800 people and cameras rolling for the live stream, reaching thousands more. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped the microphone. "My name is Stephen Mattison," his voice cracked. "Most of you know my face from headlines that called me heartless. They were right." Chapter 10. The Confession That Breaks Silence. Stephen swallowed hard, the microphone feeling impossibly heavy. 800 faces stared at him. Julie stood 3 feet away, tears already streaming down her face, her expression unreadable. "Years ago, this woman told me she was carrying my child. I told her to go have the baby alone. She did." His voice broke. "She raised my 3 daughters alone while I built bigger buildings and attended events like this one, feeling nothing, giving nothing that mattered." The crowd collectively inhaled. Stephen's hands trembled violently. He looked at Lara, Jean, and Kitty in the front row, 3 beautiful girls in red dresses, watching with wide, confused eyes. "Those 3 girls are mine. I denied them. I denied their mother when she needed me most. I accused her of manipulation when she was being honest. I destroyed her career when she was vulnerable. I was a coward wearing expensive suits, calling it strength." Someone in the audience gasped. Others shifted uncomfortably. Several people were openly crying now, moved by the raw confession. A woman in the middle of the ballroom stood up. "Thank you for telling the truth," she called out, her voice shaking. "My father never did. My children deserved to hear this." Others began standing, not in ovation but in solidarity, with Julie, with abandoned children everywhere, with the courage it took to speak truth publicly. Stephen was fully crying now, no longer trying to hide it. "Julie Johnson is the strongest person I've ever known. She didn't need my money. She needed a partner, a father for our children. I failed so completely that I can't repair it. I can only stand here and say what I should have said when she was brave enough to tell me the truth." He looked directly at Julie. "I'm sorry. I'm so profoundly sorry. Not because the world knows what I did. Because I finally understand what I did." His knees buckled. He collapsed fully, sobbing in front of hundreds of people, in front of cameras, in front of the woman he'd destroyed and the daughters he'd abandoned. The ballroom was silent, except for his broken breathing and scattered crying from audience members moved by the raw pain. Then Julie moved. She approached slowly, her face wet with tears. She stopped in front of him as he knelt on the stage floor, looking small and shattered. "Now you know what real strength looks like," she whispered, but the microphone caught it. "It's not the money, not the power. It's showing up every single day for people who need you. It's choosing them over comfort, over ego, over fear." Stephen looked up at her, unable to speak through his crying. Julie looked toward Lara, Jean, and Kitty, then back at Stephen. "They deserve to know their father. Not because you've earned it, not because I've forgiven everything, but because they didn't choose your mistakes. They're innocent in this." She extended one hand down to him. "You get one chance. Not for me, for them. If you run again, if you prove unreliable, if you hurt them the way you hurt me, there won't be another opportunity. Do you understand?" "I won't run," Stephen choked out, taking her hand. "I swear I won't. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I've changed." Julie helped him stand. The audience remained silent, riveted. She led him off stage toward the front row, where Lara, Jean, and Kitty sat with their babysitter, watching the crying man their mother was bringing toward them. Julie knelt beside her daughters. "Laura, Jean, Kitty, this is Stephen. He made some very big mistakes, but he wants to try to know you, if that's okay with you." 3 pairs of identical eyes studied Stephen. Kitty, the boldest, tilted her head. "Why are you crying?" Stephen knelt before his daughter's, face wet with tears, heart breaking and healing simultaneously. "Because I'm very sad I missed so much time with you, and very happy I get to meet you now." Lara, always cautious, looked at her mother. Julie nodded once, giving permission. The little girl reached out and patted Stephen's hand with tiny fingers. "It's okay. We can share our toys with you." Stephen broke down completely. Not the powerful CEO or calculating billionaire, but a father holding his daughter's hand for the first time, understanding exactly what he'd almost lost forever. Jean touched his other hand shyly. Kitty leaned forward and wiped his tears clumsily with her small palm. "Don't be sad," Kitty said seriously. "Mama says tears are okay, but we got to be brave too." "Your mama is very wise," Stephen managed. "Are you going to be our daddy now?" Jean asked, her voice soft and uncertain. Stephen looked at Julie, who remained standing, her expression guarded. "I hope so," he said to Jean. "If your mama says it's okay, and if you want me to be. But I have to earn that." "Do you know what earn means?" "Like when we help mama and she gives us cookies?" Laura asked. "Sort of. Except this is harder than helping with dishes. This means showing up every single day and proving I'm someone you can trust." Julie stood, watching this first fragile connection. Her expression complex, pain, hope, caution, and something like exhausted relief that maybe, finally, her daughters would know their father. The audience watched in suspended silence as Stephen met his daughters, as years of cruelty and abandonment gave way to tentative forgiveness. As a family that should never have been broken began the impossible work of becoming whole. Cameras captured it all. Stephen Mattison on his knees before the triplets he'd denied. Julie Johnson, standing guard with eyes that held no love, not anymore, but something more powerful, the absolute certainty that forgiveness, unlike abandonment, must be earned one single day at a time. And in the back of the ballroom, 800 people who'd come to celebrate community witnessed instead something even more profound. The beginning of redemption, messy and uncertain and achingly real. Proof that even the worst mistakes could start transforming into something like grace if someone was finally brave enough to face the truth they'd been running from all along.